Travel west, they said. See the world, they said. Should have stayed back in the east. I sure hope future generations appreciate what we're trying to do here. Oh, hi. I'm Meriwether Lewis. Along with my partner, William Clark, our expedition set out in 1804. We were directed by President Jefferson to make peaceful contact with the Native Americans of the West, but most of all to find the fabled Northwest Passage that would link the Atlantic and the Pacific and allow for trade. This is the story of how the West was won.
Whoa, whoa, whoa.
Hold your canoe. You can't really expect people here to believe the West was won by stuffed-shirt explorers like yourself. You can't tell that story without mentioning the cowboys. Really, in this region, the cowboys. Favor the cowboys, not the 49ers. Don't start bringing football into this and talking about manifest destiny. You uneducated swine. We called them the 49ers because they rushed, in the gold rush, to California in 1849. And I'm not saying you didn't do your part, but without stuffed shirt explorers like myself, you lot would never have been here.
Be quiet, both of you.
God, is that you?
No, I'm the narrator. You're both right and you're both wrong. The West was won by a lot of different groups, not just the two of you. Good morning or afternoon, whenever you're choosing to watch this video. This is another installment of History at Home. Today we're going to be looking at Life in the West, which is chapter 16 in your textbook. Our goal is, by the end of this PowerPoint or video, you should be able to list the reasons that explorers, Californios, mountain men, missionaries, pioneer women, Mormons, 49ers, and Chinese immigrants moved to the West. I want you to be able to list the hardships that they endured and describe the legacy that they left to the West. This last one described the legacy. Hint, hint, might be a good thing to prepare for any kind of at-home assessment that might be coming down to you later. So again, here are the sections in the textbook that deal with each of these. We're just going to go through. So we've got the explorers. It's a lovely image of Lewis and Clark. So there are a couple of reasons why the explorers went west. The first was that, like Meriwether Lewis said in the introduction, they wanted to create friendly ties with the Native Americans in the West, and that meant that they also wanted to trade with them. They also wanted to find out if there was a Northwest Passage, and if there was, if they could find it and use it for trade, because it'd be a lot easier to get goods from the East Coast to the West Coast if they could go through a water route as opposed to going overland, which would take longer, or going way down south around the Great Horn Spoon in South America. They also wanted to find out what the U.S. had purchased when they got Louisiana. Remember, wasn't really settled by Americans at this point. Similar to the idea of buying a house in an area you don't know on eBay. So you kind of get the general gist of the area by the pictures and the description from the people selling it, but you don't really know what's there until you buy it and you get there. Some of the hardships they faced. So they had to row against the current, caused blisters in hands and sore muscles, lots of mosquitoes and grizzly bears. Prickly pear cactus thorns pierced their feet. Starvation was an ever-present danger. So you got to remember, the expedition set out in May of 1804. That also meant that they were traveling in the heat of the summer, which summer and winter were not exactly the best times for traveling, just because of the extreme heat and extreme cold. So some of the legacies that they left: the explorers mapped the route to the Pacific. They established good relations with some of the tribes of Native Americans, and they also brought back a lot of information about the West. Yeah, so the mountain men. reasons they moved west. These were trappers who went to search for furs. Again, a trapper is just an individual who traps animals, skins them, and sells the furs, sells the hide. So as the East became more and more populated, there was less and less available resources for this particular trade. So they would travel west to the less inhabited lands, and because less people, more animals. Mountain men feared attacks by thieves, Native Americans, wolves, and bears, and death from accident or disease was a hazard of the profession. It's pretty dangerous job. By necessity, it was also a fairly isolated job, right? You didn't have teams and teams of trappers that went out. It was generally one person who would go out. So a sprained ankle could be fatal if it was in the wrong area. There's no one around to help them. Mountain men explored the West probably even more than the explorers. They tended to know a lot more of the game trails and things like that. Routes between Oregon and California became the Oregon and California trails. We'll talk more about the Oregon Trail next week. Their trading posts became supply stations for settlers, and personal journals made entertaining reading. So their journals would travel back east. They would get published in newspapers and magazines and as books, and that was a entertainment of the day. People in the city would hear about all of the excitement and the adventures of the mountain men in the West. Californios. So these would be these were the Spanish priests who went to establish the missions. You guys should remember this from 4th grade. They set up along the Camino del sorry about that. They set up along the El Camino Real. Then Father Juniper Cerro, now Saint Cerro, was the one who started this all and kind of ran the mission system. Other Spanish settlers wanted to find land for settlement. Neighbors lived, so some of the hardships, neighbors lived far apart. Loneliness was a daily problem. Government officials were unskilled and dishonest. And legacies that they left, the Californios gave us Spanish names for California cities. They brought new crops, grapes, olives, and citrus, and they opened California to the world. So while some explorers were traveling west, from the original 13 states, overland, we have Spain that had conquered Mexico, and then they started sending settlers and things like that up north through Mexico. So as we heard from our group presentations the other day, right, California and that region was one of the last areas to join the continental U.S. Got the before we move on. It's kind of the same thing we saw with the original settlement, right, in the East. Just two different people groups with different immune systems, and mixing them together did not work out so well, again, for the indigenous people. Pioneer women. Reasons they moved to the West. Women moved west to find new opportunities, such as establishing homesteads and finding husbands. As I stated beforehand, right, the mountain men had published their journals, and this was created a sense of celebrity around them, this kind of romantic notion of people going off and living off the land, and it caused some of the women of the East to want to move west to kind of embrace that lifestyle. Hardships they faced: they were leaving the comforts of home, leaving treasured items along the trail was emotionally difficult. As you travel, right, you've got to make tough choices about what you're bringing and how you're bringing it, even during the travel. Cooking, washing clothing, and caring for children while traveling 15 to 20 miles a day was grueling work. Again, as some of us heard the other day for a jigsaw, it could go from 20 miles to a day to a mile a day, depending on the land. So, disease and accidents killed their loved ones. Along the trail, they suffered from cold and thirst. Again, traveling in the winter or summer months wasn't particularly safe. Didn't have all of the advances that we have, right? So those wagons were open to the elements. Legacies they left: women brought schools, churches, libraries, literary societies, and charitable groups to the rugged West, and they fought for and won the right for women to vote in the West. We're going to hear more about this next week, or with the next video as well. But the West was a little bit more progressive in dealing with gender issues than it was in the East. Part of this is because it was such a hard lifestyle. It kind of required that men and women see themselves on somewhat of equal ground, and because they saw themselves on somewhat equal ground, the rights that were granted to women were a little bit more in depth in the West. Okay, so we've got the 49ers, and again, not the football team. We talked about, or our guest lecturers at the beginning of this video talked a little bit about them. Remember, the 49ers are those individuals who came to the gold rush and searched for gold in 1849. Of course, since a lot of this was centered around San Francisco later took the moniker for their football team. Okay, and the chief reason was to find gold. As people back east were hearing stories of gold being found, they thought it was a easy way to get rich quickly. However, most people who went did not find their fortunes. So they had a difficult journey to California, land or sea. I mentioned that beforehand. So overland they had to go by wagon trail, which was really long. Over sea it was a very long trip. They had to go a couple different ways to go, but the primary one was to go all the way south, all the way down around South America, and then come back up. They could also go through the Isthmus of Panama, where they would sail down part of the way, take some canoes, and basically row or carry them across land, and then get back up on another ship on the other side. It was a little quicker, but again, you have to worry about whether or not that ship's going to be there. There were no police to keep the order, so camps were rough and dangerous. This was the Wild West. Gold mining was hard and tedious work. It wasn't what a lot of people thought, where you just go and pick gold up off the ground. So it was really difficult work, and again, most people did not make their fortune. Legacies they left: warfare and disease reduced the Native American population. Many Californios lost their land to these newcomers. People would go in and just steal land. Their arrival increased the population of California so that it could become a state. California's population kind of blew up overnight. Okay, so the Mormons, this was another group that traveled west, much like America's initial founding. For a lot of it was for religious freedom. Reasons they moved west: the Mormons moved west to escape persecution back east. The road was difficult to journey. There were a lot of deaths. It was a dry and barren land that they were going. It was difficult for farmers. And again, the issue, right, if you've got farmers that are moving, farming is very much a stay where you are and build up the land kind of a thing. So as many of the first Mormons who were traveling west were farmers, it was a difficult journey for them. It wasn't necessarily, they weren't as equipped as other individuals whose livelihood was meant more on moving from place to place. Legacies they left: Mormons were the first pioneers to settle the Great Basin, became Utah. They pioneered a lot of farming methods, such as using dams and canals and irrigation ditches, which, because Utah can be so dry, it was very helpful for them. They helped other settlers make their way west. So once they took up their area, it became kind of a waypoint for people as they traveled west. In Utah, they established a center for what is now a worldwide religion. So it's another legacy that they left. So we've got Chinese immigrants. Again, as we're looking at this image, right, it does not necessarily portray this group in an equal light as the Americans who moved west, and so that was kind of a constant issue, being thought of as lesser, even when they migrated as a group. So Chinese migrated across the Pacific to find gold and riches. So remember that gold rush did not only appeal to the Americans on the East Coast. It was a worldwide phenomenon. Everyone heard about it. Everyone sent people. And so Chinese immigrants, they left China in the hopes of finding their fortune. It was not a convenient time for people from other countries and things like that to move to America, particularly those that looked different. So there were laws taxing foreign miners. They drove the Chinese immigrants out of gold camps. Chinese immigrants suffered persecution by the Americans, and Chinese helped. Some of the legacies they left, though, the Chinese helped to develop agriculture in California and brought their culture to the West. That's it for Chapter 16. For the aforementioned extra credit, can't see, but I'm using air quotes for that. What I would like you to do is just to prove that you watched the whole video, comment with your name, your first name, and your last initial only in the feed for this video. Yeah, that's pretty much it, and I'll see you in class the next day after this. Bye.